Sarah Delaney stepped off the stagecoach in Abilene, Kansas, clutching a small carpet bag and a letter that had changed her entire life, though not in the way anyone had intended. The dust from the wheels settled around her worn boots as she searched the crowd of weathered faces for the man who had sent for her, Nathan Zimmerman, the rancher who had advertised for a wife through a matchmaking agency back east. It was June of 1878, and the heat bore down mercilessly on the main street. Sarah squinted against the bright sun, her dark hair already escaping from the neat bun she had pinned that morning in St. Louis. At 15 years old, she looked even younger than her age, with wide brown eyes that took in everything with a mixture of hope and terror. The agency had doctored her papers, desperate for their commission. They had told her to say she was 18 if anyone asked, but Sarah had never been good at lying. A tall figure separated from the cluster of men near the general store, and Sarah's breath caught. He was broad-shouldered and lean, with sun-darkened skin and hair the color of wheat fields. As he approached, she could see his eyes a striking pale blue that seemed to see straight through her nervous smile. He wore dusty work clothes and carried himself with a quiet confidence that made her feel even smaller than her 5 feet and 3 inches. "Miss Delaney." His voice was deep, careful. He stopped a respectful distance away and removed his hat, revealing those sun-lightened waves. "I'm Nathan Zimmerman." Sarah tried to speak, but her mouth had gone dry. She nodded instead, clutching her bag tighter. Nathan studied her for a long moment, and Sarah watched something shift in his expression, first hope, then confusion, and finally what looked like dismay. "How old are you, miss? And please tell me the truth." The directness of the question made tears spring to her eyes. She had known this moment would come. 15, sir. The agency, they said you wouldn't mind that many girls married at 15. Nathan's jaw tightened, and he looked away toward the horizon where dust devils danced across the prairie. When he looked back, his eyes were filled with something Sarah couldn't quite identify: disappointment, certainly, but also concern. "The agency lied, Miss Delaney. I specifically requested a woman of marrying age. I'm 24 years old. I'm not in the habit of marrying children." The words stung, though they were spoken gently. Sarah felt her face flush with embarrassment and something darker, the crushing realization that she had nowhere to go. She had used every cent she had for the journey west, fleeing from an uncle who had made it clear that her presence in his household was no longer welcome after her mother's death. "I understand, Mr. Zimmerman. I apologize for the deception. If you could perhaps direct me to someone who might need help, a boarding house or a family needing a servant." "Hold on now." Nathan held up a hand, his expression troubled. "Let me think for a minute." He looked at her carpet bag, which was so small it couldn't possibly contain more than a few days' worth of belongings. "You came all the way from Missouri?" "Yes, sir, from St. Louis." "And you have family there? Someone you can return to?" Sarah shook her head, fighting to keep her voice steady. "No, sir. My mother passed last winter. There's no one." Nathan exhaled slowly, replacing his hat and looking down the street as if the answer might be written on one of the storefronts. Sarah watched his profile, noting the strong line of his jaw and the way his shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight. Finally, he turned back to her. "Here's what we're going to do. My ranch is about 5 miles outside town. I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Henley. She's a widow, good woman in her 50s. You'll stay in the main house with her. I have a foreman's cabin where I've been sleeping when I don't bed down with the hands. That arrangement will continue." "I don't understand," Sarah said quietly. "I'm not sending you back to nothing, Miss Delaney. That wouldn't sit right with me, but I'm also not marrying a 15-year-old girl." He met her eyes steadily. You'll work for your keep, help Mrs. Henley with the house and the cooking. In 3 years, when you're 18, we'll revisit this conversation. If you want to return east by then, I'll pay for your passage and give you enough money to start fresh. If you want to stay, and if we suit each other, well, then we'll talk about the original arrangement. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. It wasn't what she had expected, but it was so much more than she had dared to hope for after seeing his face when he realized her age. You would do that, for a stranger. I would do that because it's the right thing to do, Nathan said simply. Now, do you have any other belongings? This is everything, he nodded, unsurprised. Let's get you something to eat before we head out. You look like you haven't had a decent meal in days. He was right. Sarah had rationed the small amount of food she could afford for the journey, never knowing when the next meal might come. As they walked to the hotel restaurant, Sarah noticed the curious looks from townspeople. Nathan seemed oblivious, or perhaps just accustomed to attention. She learned quickly that he was well known in Abilene, his ranch one of the more successful operations in the area. Over plates of beef stew and fresh bread, Nathan explained the situation at his ranch. He ran cattle primarily, with about 2,000 head on 5,000 acres of deeded land and access to even more open range. He employed 6 regular hands, plus additional help during roundup and drives. Mrs. Henley had been keeping house for him since his father died 2 years ago, but she was getting on in years and had spoken of retiring soon. That was why Nathan had decided to finally look for a wife. I'm not much for town life, he admitted, breaking apart a piece of cornbread. The ranch is isolated. Some women find it lonely. Sarah thought of the cramped tenement where she had lived with her mother, the noise and crowds and constant struggle. I think I might like the quiet, Mr. Zimmerman. Nathan, he corrected. If you're going to be living on my property, we can dispense with formalities, but I'll call you Miss Sarah if that's acceptable. Keeps things proper. That's more than acceptable, thank you. The ride out to the ranch gave Sarah her first real look at Kansas. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, tall grass swaying in waves beneath the wind. The sky seemed impossibly large, unmarred by buildings or trees. It was beautiful in a stark, honest way that made her feel very small and somehow free at the same time. The Zimmerman ranch appeared as they crested a low rise. The main house was a solid 2-story structure built of lumber hauled from who knew where, painted white with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Nearby stood a barn, several corrals, a bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. It was more substantial than Sarah had expected, speaking to years of hard work and careful management. Mrs. Henley proved to be exactly as advertised, a sturdy, practical woman with gray hair, pulled into a tight bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at Sarah and immediately ushered her inside, clucking her tongue at Nathan. A child, Nathan Zimmerman. What were you thinking? I wasn't, Mrs. Henley. The agency deceived us both. Nathan set Sarah's carpetbag down in the front hall. Miss Sarah will be staying in the spare room upstairs. She'll help you with the household work. I'll be in the foreman's cabin. Mrs. Henley's expression softened as she looked at Sarah's thin frame and exhausted eyes. Well, the first order of business is a proper meal and a bath. You look dead on your feet, girl. Sarah was shown to a small room on the 2nd floor that was nicer than anywhere she had ever slept. It had a real bed with a quilt, a washstand, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out over the prairie. Mrs. Henley brought up hot water for washing and promised supper would be ready within the hour. Left alone, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed and let herself cry quietly. The tears were complicated relief, exhaustion, gratitude, and a strange sense of loss for a future that had been promised and then gently taken away. But underneath, it all was something else. The memory of Nathan's blue eyes and the unexpected kindness in his voice. 3 years seemed both impossibly long and somehow not long enough. Life on the ranch fell into a rhythm quickly. Sarah rose before dawn to help Mrs. Henley prepare breakfast for the ranch hands. They ate in the main house kitchen, all 8 men crowding around the long table, their conversation a mixture of work talk and easy banter. Nathan ate with them but didn't linger, always the first to finish and head out to the day's tasks. Sarah learned that ranch life was governed by the seasons and the needs of the cattle. Summer meant long days of riding fence lines, checking water sources, and watching for signs of disease or predators. The work was endless, and Nathan was always in the thick of it, working alongside his men rather than merely directing them. He came back each evening covered in dust and sweat, his face lined with fatigue. Mrs. Henley taught Sarah everything about keeping a ranch house. How to cook for hungry men who worked hard physical labor, how to make soap and candles, how to preserve food for winter, how to manage the endless battle against dust and dirt. The work was demanding, but Sarah threw herself into it with determination. She wanted to prove she was worth the chance Nathan had given her. In the evenings, after supper was cleared and the dishes washed, Nathan would sometimes sit on the front porch, going over account books by lamplight or simply watching the sun set over the prairie. Sarah would see him there through the window as she helped Mrs. Henley with mending, his profile outlined against the deepening sky. She found herself watching him more than she should, noticing small things, the way he was always patient with the horses, how he never raised his voice even when frustrated, the rare smile that transformed his serious face. Mrs. Henley noticed, of course. One evening about a month after Sarah's arrival, as they sat together working on a quilt, the older woman spoke without looking up from her stitches. "He's a good man, Nathan is. His father was hard, expected perfection. Nathan learned young to keep his feelings close. When his ma died, I helped her at the end. He was just 13. Didn't cry at the funeral, but I'd hear him sometimes at night." Sarah's needle paused. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I see how you look at him, girl, and I see how he doesn't look at you, and I want you to understand why." Mrs. Henley's voice was gentle but firm. "He's keeping his distance because he's determined to do right by you. He won't let himself see you as anything but a child he's protecting, not until you're old enough for it to be proper. It's going to be a long 3 years if you set your heart on him too soon." I don't," Sarah stammered, feeling her face heat. "Yes, you do," Mrs. Henley said, not unkindly. "And there's no shame in it. He's worth caring for. Just be patient and, more important, be yourself. Grow into the woman you're meant to be. 3 years can change a person considerably." Sarah took those words to heart. She stopped watching Nathan so obviously and focused instead on learning everything she could. Mrs. Henley was a patient teacher, and Sarah discovered she had a knack for managing a household. She learned to read the signs of weather in the sky, to know which herbs to use for cooking and which for medicine, to keep accounts and manage supplies. She also began to ride. The ranch kept several horses beyond the working stock, and Nathan assigned her a gentle mare named Rosie for trips to town or around the property. At first, Sarah was terrified, but the freedom of riding across the open prairie soon became one of her greatest joys. She would take Rosie out on Sunday afternoons, her only free time, and ride until the ranch buildings were small behind her, and the sky seemed close enough to touch. It was on one of these rides that she encountered Nathan away from the ranch. She had ridden farther than usual, following a creek that cut through a small stand of cottonwood trees. She found him there, standing beside his horse, looking down at something on the ground. As she approached, He looked up, and she saw a tension in his face she didn't understand. "Miss Sarah," he said, his voice tight, "this isn't a good place for you to be alone." "Why not?" She dismounted, and that was when she saw what he had been looking at: a small calf, clearly dead for several days. "Wolves," Nathan said. "Pack has been working this area. I've lost 3 calves this month." He glanced at the sky, noting the position of the sun. "You shouldn't ride out this far alone. If you come across the pack, Rosie would likely bolt and you could be thrown." Sarah felt foolish. She had been so focused on her own enjoyment that she hadn't considered the dangers. "I'm sorry, I didn't think." His expression softened slightly. "How were you to know? But from now on, if you want to ride beyond sight of the house, take one of the hands with you. Or let me know, and I'll go with you when I can spare the time. You have enough to do without playing nursemaid to me." "It's not about that," Nathan said, and something in his tone made her look up. He was watching her with an intensity she hadn't seen before. Then he seemed to catch himself, and the moment passed. "I gave you my protection when you came here. That means something to me. I'd appreciate it if you'd not take foolish risks." "I won't," Sarah promised. "I'll be more careful." Nathan nodded, then bent to secure a rope around the dead calf. "I need to drag this away from the creek, keep it from fouling the water. You should head back before it gets later." Sarah rode back slowly, thinking about the look in his eyes. It hadn't been the way someone looked at a child. It had been something more, something quickly shuttered but undeniably there. Mrs. Henley's words came back to her. 3 years could change a person considerably. But it seemed 3 years might also be an eternity. The seasons turned. Sarah's 16th birthday came and went with little fanfare. She didn't mention it, and no one else knew the date. Summer faded into autumn, and the ranch prepared for the trail drive to the railhead. Nathan would be gone for nearly 3 weeks with most of the hands, leaving only 2 men behind to watch the remaining stock and protect the ranch. The night before the drive, Nathan came to the main house after supper. Mrs. Henley had already retired, leaving Sarah alone in the kitchen finishing the last of the cleaning. He stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. "Miss Sarah, I wanted to speak with you before I leave tomorrow." Sarah dried her hands on her apron. "Of course. Jim and Pete will be here while I'm gone. They're good men, trustworthy. But I want you to know there's a rifle above the door to my office and a pistol in the drawer of the desk. Mrs. Henley knows where everything is. I don't expect trouble, but cattle drives draw attention, and sometimes drifters come through looking for easy pickings from places they think are understaffed." The concern in his voice touched her. "We'll be careful, and you should be too. I've heard trail drives can be dangerous." "I've made this drive a dozen times," Nathan said, but he smiled slightly. "Still, I appreciate the sentiment." He hesitated, then added, "You've done good work here, Miss Sarah. Mrs. Henley says you've taken to ranch life better than she expected. I want you to know that I've noticed." Sarah's heart beat faster. "Thank you. That means a great deal to me. When I get back, we'll make arrangements for you to have a small wage. You've more than earned it." He nodded once, then turned to go, but paused at the door. 3 years doesn't seem quite so long anymore, does it? He was gone before Sarah could respond, leaving her standing in the kitchen with her heart pounding and a smile she couldn't quite contain. The 3 weeks Nathan was gone felt longer than all the months before. Sarah found herself watching the horizon constantly, looking for the telltale dust cloud that would signal the returning drovers. She and Mrs. Henley fell into a different rhythm without the men to cook for, quieter and somehow more intimate. The older woman spoke more freely about her own life, a marriage that had been happy but brief, a son who had died young, the choice to keep working rather than fade into lonely retirement. "You think I'm foolish?" Sarah asked one evening as they sat on the porch shelling peas. For caring about Nathan the way I do, foolish? No. Mrs. Henley's hands moved steadily, years of practice making the work automatic. Young, perhaps, hopeful, certainly, but there are worse things than caring for a good man. What if he doesn't feel the same when the time comes? Can't say for certain what's in his heart, girl, but I've seen the way he's careful around you like you're something precious he's afraid to break. That tells me something. She paused, looking out at the darkening prairie. Nathan's the kind of man who decides on something and then sees it through, no matter what. He decided to wait 3 years, and he will, but that doesn't mean the waiting is easy for him either. Sarah thought about that often in the days that followed. She had been so focused on her own feelings, her own anticipation of the future, that she hadn't considered what Nathan might be experiencing. Was it possible he felt the same pull she did? The same awareness that seemed to crackle in the air when they were in the same room? When Nathan finally returned, Sarah was gathering eggs from the henhouse. She heard the sound of multiple horses and came out to find the whole crew riding up the lane, dusty and tired but in good spirits. The drive had gone well, Nathan told them over a hastily prepared meal. Good prices at the railhead, no significant losses, whether that had mostly cooperated. His men were paid and given 2 days leave to visit town before the next round of work began. After everyone had dispersed, Sarah found Nathan at the barn, unsaddling his horse. His movements were slow with exhaustion, and she noticed new lines around his eyes. "Welcome home," she said softly. He turned, and his face transformed. "Miss Sarah, it's good to be back." He paused in his work, just looking at her. "The place looks well kept. You and Mrs. Henley had no trouble." "None at all. It was quiet. Quiet can be good." He returned to loosening the cinch, but his movements were distracted now. "I thought about what you said before I left, about being careful. There was a river crossing, the current stronger than we expected, lost my hat and nearly lost more." He smiled slightly. "I kept thinking that I'd made promises to keep, and I'd better not be fool enough to break them by drowning in some nameless river." Sarah's throat tightened. "I'm glad you were careful then. 2.5 years, Miss Sarah, give or take a few months." "I know," she said, and their eyes met in the lamplight of the barn. The moment stretched between them, loaded with everything they weren't saying. Then Nathan's horse shifted, breaking the spell, and he returned to his work. Sarah walked back to the house with her heart full. 2.5 years. It was still a long time, but it was also somehow wonderfully short. Winter came to the Kansas prairie with bitter cold and occasional snow. The ranch work slowed but never stopped. Animals still needed tending, fences still needed mending, and preparations for spring had to be made. Sarah spent more time indoors, learning from Mrs. Henley's seemingly endless store of knowledge about running a household. She also discovered that she had a talent for figures. Nathan's account books fascinated her, and when he mentioned struggling with keeping track of all the expenses and income from various aspects of the ranch operation, she shyly offered to help. He accepted, and soon Sarah was spending several evenings a week in his office, carefully recording transactions and helping him see patterns in the numbers. Working together in the close confines of the office, lit by lamplight while wind howled outside, created an intimacy that Sarah treasured. They didn't talk much beyond the work, but she learned things about him anyway. She learned that he had dreams of expanding the ranch, maybe breeding horses in addition to running cattle. She learned that he read more than most cowboys she had met, that he had opinions about politics and progress, and what the future might hold for the West. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that only emerged when he was comfortable. And sometimes, she would look up from the ledger to find him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. He never said anything in those moments, just returned his attention to the papers in front of him, but Sarah held each look close like a promise. Spring brought activity back to the ranch. Calving season meant sleepless nights and constant vigilance. Sarah learned to help with the birthing when needed, to identify when a cow was in distress, to care for orphaned calves that needed bottle feeding. She worked alongside the men now, her initial shyness burned away by months of hard work and growing confidence. She turned 17 that spring, and this time she mentioned the date to Mrs. Henley. The older woman insisted on making a special supper, and that evening the whole crew gathered in the main house. It was the first birthday Sarah had celebrated since her mother's death, and the simple kindness of it brought tears to her eyes. Nathan gave her a gift, a pair of riding gloves, soft leather that must have cost more than he should have spent. "For your Sunday rides," he said quietly, and their fingers brushed as she took them from him. Later, as the men filtered back to the bunkhouse and Mrs. Henley began clearing dishes, Nathan asked Sarah to walk with him. They went out to the porch, where the spring night was alive with cricket song and the distant call of an owl. 17, Nathan said, leaning against the porch rail. Getting closer. 18 months, Sarah said. She had been counting, give or take. I want you to understand something, Miss Sarah. He turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. When you came here, I made you a promise, not just to wait, but to give you a real choice. If you want to leave when you turn 18, if you've decided this life isn't for you or that I'm not, he stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. The offer still stands. I'll pay your passage, give you money to start over wherever you want to go. No obligation. Sarah felt a flash of panic. Do you want me to leave? No, he said, and the vehemence in his voice surprised them both. He took a breath, visibly composing himself. No, I don't want that, but I need you to know you have the choice. I need to know that if you stay, it's because you want to, not because you feel trapped or obligated. Nathan, Sarah said, using his first name deliberately, watching him react to the sound of it. I've had almost 2 years to think about this. I know what I want. You might change your mind. You're still young. I'm old enough to know my own heart, Sarah interrupted. And I'm old enough to wait another 18 months to prove it to you. He looked at her for a long moment, something fierce and tender in his expression. Then he reached out and touched her face, just the lightest brush of his fingers against her cheek. You've grown up so much, he said softly. Sometimes I look at you and can't believe you're the same frightened girl who stepped off that stage. I'm not, Sarah said. Not anymore. No, he agreed. You're not. He dropped his hand and stepped back, putting proper distance between them again. 18 months, Miss Sarah, and then we'll see what's what. Summer passed in a blur of work and stolen moments. Sarah found excuses to be where Nathan was, helping with tasks that didn't really need an extra pair of hands, but allowed her to be near him. He seemed to do the same, appearing in the kitchen more often, lingering over coffee after meals, asking her opinion on decisions that probably didn't require her input. Mrs. Henley watched it all with knowing eyes and said nothing, though Sarah sometimes caught her smiling to herself. In the fall, a fever swept through the area. Several of the hands fell ill, and then Mrs. Henley herself took to her bed, weak and feverish. Sarah nursed her devotedly, barely sleeping as she tried to keep the fever down and get fluids into the older woman. Nathan helped when he could, though he was also trying to keep the ranch running with a reduced crew. It was during this time, in the darkest part of a long night, that Mrs. Henley gripped Sarah's hand with surprising strength. You're a good girl, she whispered. You'll be good for him. He needs someone strong enough to match him, gentle enough to soften his edges. You're both, Sarah, you're both. Hush, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "Don't talk like that, you're going to be fine." But Mrs. Henley wasn't fine. She died 3 days later in the morning light, with Sarah holding her hand and Nathan standing quietly in the doorway. They buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch, and Sarah felt the loss like a physical thing, a hole in her chest where her second mother had been. For days after, Sarah moved through the house like a ghost, doing the necessary work mechanically. Nathan tried to talk to her, but she couldn't find words for the grief. Finally, a week after the funeral, she broke down while trying to make bread the way Mrs. Henley had taught her, and suddenly Nathan was there, pulling her into his arms. "I know," he murmured into her hair. "I know it hurts. She was dear to me too." Sarah clung to him, and for a long moment neither of them moved. Then Nathan gently stepped back, his hands on her shoulders. "She cared for you deeply, Miss Sarah. She told me toward the end that she was glad she'd lived long enough to see you settled and happy." "I'm not settled," Sarah said, wiping her eyes. "Not yet." "Soon," Nathan said, and there was a promise in the word. Soon enough. The rest of the fall and winter passed quietly. Sarah managed the household alone now, with occasional help from one of the hands' wives who came in weekly to assist with the heavier cleaning. She grew into the role, her natural organizational skills and the lessons Mrs. Henley had taught her serving her well. The men respected her, and the house ran smoothly despite the loss. Her 18th birthday was fast approaching. Sarah could feel the tension building like a gathering storm. Nathan felt it too. She could see it in the way he watched her, in the careful distance he maintained, in the moments when their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. One evening in early spring, about a month before her birthday, Nathan asked her to join him for a ride. They saddled horses and rode out to the creek where he had warned her about wolves 2 years before. The danger had passed. The pack had been hunted down the previous year, and the spot had become one of Sarah's favorite places on the ranch. They dismounted and walked to the bank where early wildflowers were beginning to bloom. For a while neither spoke, just stood together in the fading light. "I've been thinking," Nathan finally said, "about the future, about what comes after." Sarah's heart began to pound. "After? After your birthday. After we have the conversation we've been waiting 3 years to have." He turned to face her. "I want you to know what you'd be agreeing to, Miss Sarah. This ranch, it's my life. It will always require more hours than there are in a day, more work than one man can really do. There will be hard seasons and lean years. There will be danger from weather, from animals, from the 100 things that can go wrong. The nearest town is 5 miles, and in winter we can be snowed in for weeks." "I know all that," Sarah said. "I've lived it for almost 3 years now." Living it as a member of the household is different from committing to it as a wife, a partner. He took a breath. "I need you to be sure, Sarah, completely sure, because once you say yes, if you say yes, I'll not let you go easy. You'll be mine and I'll be yours, and that will be that." Sarah stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "Nathan Zimmerman, I have been sure for longer than I should probably admit. I love this ranch, I love this life, and I love you. I have for years, even when I knew I shouldn't, even when I tried not to. So yes, I'm sure. I'm completely sure." She watched the words hit him, watched his careful control crack. "Sarah," he said, and her name in his voice was a prayer and a promise. "I've been half in love with you since you tried to help me with those account books and reorganized my entire system without asking. I've been fully in love with you since the night you sat up with Mrs. Henley, so gentle and patient and strong. The only thing that's kept me sane these last months is knowing I'd made a promise to wait, to do right by you." "Then keep your promise," Sarah said, though her voice shook. "1 more month, Nathan, and then I'm yours." He reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. "1 more month," he agreed, And then we'll do this proper. I'll ride into town tomorrow, talk to the preacher. We'll have a real wedding, Sarah. Small, maybe, but real. You deserve that. I just want you, she said honestly. The rest doesn't matter. It matters to me, Nathan said. He leaned down, and for a moment Sarah thought he might kiss her, but he pressed his lips to her forehead instead, soft and reverent. One more month, he whispered against her skin, and then everything. The month that followed was the longest and shortest of Sarah's life. Nathan rode to town and made arrangements with the preacher, and word spread quickly. The community that Sarah had been quietly becoming part of for 3 years suddenly rallied around her. Women she barely knew appeared at the ranch with offers of help, with fabric for a dress, with advice and stories and warm wishes. Mrs. Patterson, the seamstress in town, insisted on making Sarah's wedding dress as a gift. It was simple but beautiful cream-colored cotton with tiny buttons down the back and lace at the collar and cuffs. Sarah stood for fittings and felt like someone else, someone who deserved such kindness. Nathan was gone more often, making preparations he wouldn't tell her about. The hands grinned knowingly whenever she asked where he was, but no one would give her a straight answer. She tried not to be frustrated, tried to focus on her own preparations, cleaning the house from top to bottom, planning a meal for after the ceremony, trying to calm her racing heart. The night before the wedding, Sarah couldn't sleep. She stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the moonlit prairie, thinking about how much had changed since that terrified 15-year-old girl had arrived in Abilene. She had grown up here, had become someone strong and capable and sure of herself. And tomorrow, she would marry the man who had made it all possible. A soft knock on her door made her turn. "Come in," she called, expecting perhaps one of the ranch hands' wives who were staying over to help with the morning preparations. Instead, Nathan stepped into the room and Sarah's breath caught. "You shouldn't be here," she said, but without any real force behind the words. "I know," Nathan said, "but I couldn't sleep and I saw your light." He stayed by the door, proper even now. "Are you having second thoughts?" "None at all," Sarah said. "Are you?" "Not even a fraction of one." He smiled, and in the lamplight he looked younger, less burdened. "I wanted to give you something. I was going to wait until after the ceremony, but I think tonight is right." He crossed the room and held out a small box. Sarah opened it to find a ring, simple gold with a small diamond that caught the light. "It was my mother's," Nathan said softly. "My father gave it to her when they married. She wore it every day until she died. I want you to have it if you'll accept it." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Nathan, it's beautiful. May I?" He took the ring from the box and reached for her left hand. The ring slid on perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "There," Nathan said, but he didn't release her hand. They stood like that, hands joined, the ring binding them in a promise that would be fulfilled in just a few hours. "I need to tell you something," Sarah said quietly. "Before tomorrow, before we make our vows, I need you to know. When I came here, I was running from an impossible situation. I was desperate and scared and had nowhere else to turn. You saved me, Nathan. But that's not why I'm marrying you. I'm marrying you because you're the best man I've ever known. Because you've shown me what it means to work hard and care deeply and keep your word no matter what. Because I can't imagine my life without you in it. I need you to know that." Nathan's throat worked. "Sarah," he said, and then he was pulling her close, holding her against his chest. She could hear his heart pounding, as rapid as her own. "Tomorrow," he said into her hair. "Tomorrow I get to call you my wife. It feels like something I've been waiting my whole life for." "One more night," Sarah whispered, "and then forever." Nathan pulled back, cupping her face once more. "One more night," he agreed. Then finally he bent and kissed her. It was soft and sweet and full of restrained passion, a promise of everything to come. When he pulled away, they were both breathing hard. "I should go," Nathan said, though he didn't move. It's not proper for you to be in my room at all," Sarah pointed out, and he laughed. "Fair point, but I am going. I want to do this right all the way through." He kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then her lips once more, quick and gentle. "Sleep, Sarah. Tomorrow our life begins." After he left, Sarah did sleep deeply and dreamlessly, the ring on her finger catching moonlight. The wedding was held at the church in Abilene on a bright April morning in 1881. Sarah wore her new dress and carried wildflowers that Nathan's hands had picked at dawn. The church was full. Neighbors Sarah had met over the past 3 years, ranch hands dressed in their Sunday best, townspeople who had watched the unusual situation unfold and were invested in its happy conclusion. But Sarah saw only Nathan, standing at the front of the church in a new suit that made him look both uncomfortable and impossibly handsome. When she walked down the aisle, his eyes never left her face, and the look in them made her feel like the only person in the world. The preacher spoke about commitment and faith, about building a life together through good times and bad. Sarah and Nathan repeated their vows, their voices clear and strong. When Nathan said, "I do," Sarah felt her heart might burst from the joy of it. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher said. "Nathan, you may kiss your bride." And Nathan did, there in front of everyone, a kiss that was both chaste and full of promise. The congregation erupted in applause, and Sarah laughed against Nathan's lips, happiness flooding through her. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch. Tables were set up in the yard, covered with food that neighbors had brought. There was music. Someone had a fiddle, someone else a guitar, and dancing as the sun moved across the sky. Sarah danced with Nathan, with the ranch hands, with neighbors she barely knew. She accepted congratulations and well wishes until her face hurt from smiling. As evening approached and guests began to drift away, Nathan found her near the house. "Ready to see your wedding present?" he asked, his eyes bright with anticipation. "You already gave me your mother's ring," Sarah protested. "That was different. Come on." He took her hand and led her around the back of the house, toward the foreman's cabin where he had been sleeping for the past 3 years. Except it wasn't the same cabin anymore. Sarah stopped short, staring. The structure had been completely rebuilt and expanded. What had been a simple one-room affair was now a small house, with windows and a porch and even a small garden plot already marked out. "I've been working on it since last fall," Nathan said, watching her face. "I wanted us to have our own place, somewhere that was just ours. The main house will always be the ranch headquarters, but I thought you might like something separate, somewhere private." Sarah walked up onto the porch, marveling at the craftsmanship. Inside, the space was divided into 3 rooms, a main living area with a kitchen, a bedroom, and even a small room that could serve as an office or nursery. The furniture was simple but well made, and there were curtains at the windows, clearly stitched by someone who cared about getting the details right. "Nathan," Sarah breathed, turning to find him watching her anxiously. "It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect." The relief on his face was palpable. "I wanted to give you something that was yours. Not the ranch, not the land. Those will always require sharing, require working with the hands and the neighbors. But this is ours alone." Sarah crossed to him and wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face against his chest. "I love it." "I love you, thank you." Nathan's arms came around her, holding her close. "Thank you for waiting," he said quietly. "Thank you for growing up here, for becoming part of this place. Thank you for choosing me." "Always," Sarah said, "always you." As the last light faded from the sky, Nathan lifted Sarah into his arms, carrying her over the threshold of their new home. He kicked the door closed behind them, and Sarah laughed, the sound full of joy and anticipation. "Welcome home, Mrs. Zimmerman," Nathan said, and then he kissed her, and talking became unnecessary. The night was long and sweet, a discovery of everything they had been waiting years to share. Nathan was gentle and patient, and Sarah felt cherished in a way she had never imagined possible. They learned each other in the darkness, and when dawn finally came, Sarah woke to find Nathan propped on one elbow, watching her sleep. "Good morning, wife," he said, smiling. "Good morning, husband," Sarah replied, and the words felt like magic on her tongue. They stayed in their little house for 3 days, emerging only briefly for Nathan to check on the most urgent ranch business before returning to Sarah's arms. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts and dreams for their future. They learned each other's bodies, growing more confident and comfortable with each passing day. When they finally returned to normal life, the ranch hands greeted them with knowing grins and good-natured ribbing that made Sarah blush and Nathan smile. But the work couldn't wait forever, and soon they fell into a new rhythm, Nathan managing the ranch while Sarah kept their home and helped with the accounts and planning. But it was different now. They were partners in truth, not just in arrangement. Nathan consulted Sarah on major decisions, valuing her insight and intelligence. Sarah took on more responsibility for the business side of the ranch, her talent for organization and numbers proving invaluable. They worked together in a way that made the ranch more successful than it had been under Nathan's sole management. The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. A drought that summer tested everyone's endurance, forcing difficult decisions about which cattle to sell and which to try to sustain. Sarah stood beside Nathan through it all, helping him think through options, supporting him when the stress threatened to overwhelm. And in the winter of their first year together, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She told Nathan on Christmas Eve, watching his face transform with wonder and joy. He placed his hand on her still flat belly with a reverence that made her cry. "A baby," he said, awestruck. "Our baby." Their son was born in late summer of 1882, a healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him Thomas, after Nathan's father, but with the understanding that this Thomas would grow up differently, with love freely expressed and emotions acknowledged. Holding their son for the first time, with Nathan beside her and the prairie sunset pouring golden light through the window, Sarah felt a contentment so profound it almost frightened her. She thought of the frightened 15-year-old girl she had been, and the woman she had become, and the man who had made it all possible by simply being good and decent and patient. "What are you thinking?" Nathan asked, his hand gentle on her shoulder as they both looked down at their sleeping son. "That I'm grateful," Sarah said, "for everything, for you most of all." "The gratitude goes both ways," Nathan said. He kissed her temple. "You've made this house a home, Sarah. You've made my life complete. I knew 3 years ago that you were worth waiting for, I just didn't know quite how much." Life settled into a new normal with Thomas. Sarah learned to balance caring for an infant with her household and ranch duties, though Nathan insisted on hiring a young woman from town to help a few days a week. "You have enough to manage," he said firmly when Sarah protested. "Let someone help you the way Mrs. Henley helped me." Thomas grew quickly, a happy baby who became a curious toddler. Sarah would often find Nathan in their son's room late at night, just watching him sleep, and she knew he was marveling at the miracle of this small life they had created. The ranch continued to prosper. Good rains returned, and Nathan's careful management and Sarah's sharp eye for economics allowed them to expand their operation. They bought additional land and increased their herd. Nathan began breeding horses, as he had once mentioned wanting to do, and Sarah discovered she had a talent for training them. When Thomas was 2, Sarah became pregnant again. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1885, a tiny thing with incredible lungs. They named her Margaret, after Nathan's mother, and called her Maggie from the start. With 2 children and an expanding ranch, life was busier than ever. But it was also fuller, richer, shot through with moments of joy that Sarah treasured. Thomas learning to ride on a gentle pony, Maggie's first laugh, family suppers in their small house with Nathan at the head of the table, looking at his family with such obvious love it made Sarah's heart ache. The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Thomas started lessons with a tutor who came from town 3 times a week. Maggie grew into a spirited child who followed her father everywhere, determined to be a ranch hand herself someday. The ranch continued to grow, becoming one of the most successful operations in the region. Sarah and Nathan grew together too, their bond deepening with each passing year. They had disagreements, certainly about how to handle a difficult ranch hand, about whether to invest in new equipment, about discipline for the children. But they learned to navigate conflict with respect and communication, never letting disagreements fester into resentment. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nathan took Sarah back to the creek where he had first told her what life with him would be like. The children were with a neighbor for the afternoon, and it was just the 2 of them under the vast Kansas sky. "You remember what I said to you here?" Nathan asked, holding her hand as they walked along the bank. "You told me all the hard parts," Sarah said. "The long hours, the danger, the isolation. And you said you were sure, that you loved the ranch and the life and me." Nathan stopped, turning to face her. "I think about that sometimes, about how young you were, how much faith it took to commit to an unknown future. And I marvel that you've never regretted it, even when things were hard." "Regret it?" Sarah shook her head. "Nathan, these have been the best 10 years of my life." "Yes, it's been hard sometimes, but it's also been wonderful. You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You gave me time to grow up. You gave me respect and partnership and a love I didn't even know was possible. How could I regret any of that?" Nathan pulled her close, kissing her with the passion that had never faded between them. "Here's to the next 10 years, then," he said against her lips. "And the 10 after that, and all the years we're blessed to have together." They made love there by the creek, in the tall grass under the afternoon sun, as free and joyous as newlyweds. Afterward, lying in Nathan's arms, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her here, the fear and desperation that had driven her west, the unexpected kindness that had saved her, the slow building of trust and love. "I wouldn't change a thing," she said aloud. "Not even the waiting." Nathan asked, running his fingers through her hair. "Especially not the waiting," Sarah said. "It made us who we are. It gave us the foundation everything else was built on." "Wise woman," Nathan murmured. "I learned from a wise man. More years passed, bringing more changes." Thomas grew into a serious young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. At 18, he took on more responsibility, working alongside Nathan as a true partner. Maggie, meanwhile, proved to have a gift for breeding horses. The program Nathan had started years ago flourished under her care. Sarah and Nathan's home remained the heart of the ranch. Though their children were grown or nearly so, family suppers were still sacred time. They gathered each evening, sharing the events of their days, debating ranch policy, telling stories. The small house Nathan had built had been expanded over the years, but it remained fundamentally the same, a place of love and safety and belonging. In 1901, 20 years after their wedding, Sarah woke on her birthday to find Nathan already up and dressed. "Come with me," he said, pulling her out of bed. "I have something to show you." Curious, Sarah dressed quickly and followed him outside. The prairie was just beginning to lighten with dawn, and the air was cool and fresh. Nathan led her to the barn where a wagon waited, already loaded with supplies. "What's this?" Sarah asked. "A day away," Nathan said. "Just you and me. Thomas and Maggie can handle things here." He helped her up onto the wagon seat and climbed up beside her. "I thought we could visit the old places. The creek, the hill where we buried Mrs. Henley, the spot where we first met." It was a pilgrimage of sorts, Sarah realized, a journey through their shared history. They drove slowly, talking about the memories associated with each location. At the creek, they laughed about that anniversary celebration. At Mrs. Henley's grave, they laid flowers and shared stories about the woman who had meant so much to both of them. Finally, as the sun was setting, Nathan drove the wagon into Abilene. The town had grown considerably in 20 years, but the old stagecoach station was still there. Nathan stopped the wagon and helped Sarah down. "This is where it started," he said quietly, looking at the dusty space where passengers disembarked. "Right here, I saw a terrified girl step off the stage and thought my life was over before it had really begun." "And instead," Sarah prompted, leaning against him. "Instead, it was the best thing that ever happened to me." Nathan turned her in his arms. "I love you, Sarah. I've loved you for most of your life in one way or another. First as someone I wanted to protect, then as someone I admired and respected, and finally as the only woman I could ever imagine spending my life with. You've given me everything: a home, children, a partnership that makes every day better. I just wanted you to know that, here at the place where it all began." Sarah kissed him, there in the middle of Abilene, not caring who saw. "I love you too. Then, now, always." They stayed in town that night at the hotel where they had shared their first meal together all those years ago. And in the morning, they drove home to their ranch, their children, their life. More years passed in the gentle rhythm of ranch life. Thomas married a woman from a neighboring ranch, and they built a house on Zimmerman land. Maggie married a young veterinarian who shared her passion for horses. Grandchildren came, filling the ranch with new life and laughter. Sarah and Nathan grew older together gracefully. Nathan's hair went white, but his eyes remained the same striking blue. Sarah's dark hair showed silver threads, but her smile was as bright as ever. They still rode together on Sunday afternoons, though at a gentler pace now. They still worked together on the ranch accounts, though Thomas handled most of the day-to-day operations now. On a summer evening in 1915, Sarah and Nathan sat on the porch of their small house, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Thomas's oldest boy was teaching his younger siblings to rope a fence post, while Maggie's daughter read aloud from a book under a tree. 54 years, Nathan said suddenly. Sarah looked at him questioningly. "Since you arrived in Abilene, 54 years since I saw you step off that stage." He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that had become so familiar it was like breathing. "It's been a good life, hasn't it?" "The best," Sarah agreed. "Though I never could have imagined it back then. I was so scared, so lost." "And look at you now," Nathan said, pride evident in his voice. "The heart of this ranch, the center of our family, the love of my life." "We built something good here," Sarah said, looking out over the land they had worked together for so long. "Something that will last beyond us." "That we did." Nathan squeezed her hand. "No regrets, Sarah. Not a single one." She turned to him, this man who had waited for her, who had loved her through everything. "You. Only that we won't have another 54 years, Nathan said honestly. "But I'll take whatever we're given and be grateful for every day." They sat in companionable silence as the sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The grandchildren's laughter drifted on the evening breeze, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. It was an ordinary evening like thousands of others they had shared, and yet it was precious beyond measure. Sarah thought about the path that had brought her here, the desperation, the unexpected kindness, the long wait, the deep love that had grown and sustained them through decades. She thought about the frightened girl she had been and the woman she had become, and she knew that every moment of the journey had been worth it. "I'd do it all again," she said aloud. "Every bit of it, exactly the same." Nathan smiled, that slow smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. "So would I," he said. "So would I." They remained on the porch until the stars came out, hands clasped, hearts united, watching over the life they had built together. And in the gathering darkness, surrounded by family and land and love, Sarah felt a peace so complete it was like coming home. The years continued to unfold gently. Nathan lived to be 75, still riding out to check the fences until just a few weeks before he passed peacefully in his sleep with Sarah beside him. She held his hand as he took his last breath, and though her heart broke, she was grateful for every moment they had shared. Sarah lived another 5 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even great-grandchildren. She remained sharp and engaged, still helping with ranch decisions, still telling stories about the early days. And on quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch of the little house Nathan had built for her, looking out over the prairie and remembering. When Sarah died at 73 in the spring of 1931, it was in the same bed where she had spent her wedding night, in the house that had been her sanctuary and her joy. Thomas was with her, and Maggie, and several of the grandchildren. They held her hands and told her they loved her, and Sarah smiled. Her last words were simple. "Tell him I'm coming. Tell Nathan I'm coming home." They buried her beside Nathan on the hill overlooking the ranch, near where Mrs. Henley had been laid to rest decades before. The entire community turned out for the funeral, testament to the impact Sarah had made during her 50 years in Kansas. People spoke of her kindness, her strength, her partnership with Nathan that had built something lasting and good. The ranch continued under Thomas's management, and then his children's, carrying on the legacy Sarah and Nathan had established. The small house remained standing, carefully preserved by the family as a reminder of where it all began. Generations of children played in its rooms and heard the story of the mail-order bride who arrived too young, and the cowboy who waited 3 years and loved her always. It became a family legend, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires. The story of patience rewarded, of love that grew slowly and lasted a lifetime. The story of two people who built something remarkable together, not just a successful ranch, but a family, a community, a legacy of love that continued to ripple outward long after they were gone. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew across the Kansas prairie, and the sun set in gold and crimson glory, some swore they could see two figures on the porch of the little house sitting close together, hands clasped, watching over the land they loved and the family they had created. A lasting testament to the power of doing what was right, of waiting when waiting was hard, and of loving with everything you had, always and forever. The ranch still stands today, passed down through generations, a working operation that honors the values Sarah and Nathan established over a century ago. The original house Nathan built remains, carefully maintained, with its simple rooms and handmade furniture. Visitors, descendants who come to see where their family began, stand on that porch and look out over the prairie, and they understand something of what drew Sarah and Nathan together and held them through all their years. In the barn, in a frame on the wall, hangs a photograph taken on Sarah and Nathan's 50th wedding anniversary. They sit together on the porch steps, his arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling at the camera with the ease of people who have nothing left to prove. Around them are children and grandchildren, but Sarah and Nathan form the clear center, the foundation on which everything else was built. Below the photograph is a small plaque with a simple inscription, words Thomas had engraved after his mother's death. Sarah and Nathan Zimmerman. She arrived too young. He waited. They loved always. This ranch is their legacy. This family is their gift. And so the story lives on, passed from generation to generation, a reminder of what can be built on a foundation of patience, respect, and love. The story of a frightened 15-year-old girl who found unexpected sanctuary, and a 24-year-old man who had the wisdom and character to do what was right, even when it meant waiting. The story of 3 years that felt like forever and a lifetime that wasn't long enough. The story of Sarah and Nathan Zimmerman, whose love began with a promise kept and endured through every season, every challenge, every joy. A love story written in the dust of Kansas prairie, in the endless sky, in the land itself. A love story that became a legacy, that built a family, that created something lasting and true. And on those rare, perfect evenings when the wind is just right and the light falls golden across the prairie, locals say you can still feel their presence, not haunting, but blessing. The young bride who grew into a remarkable woman, and the patient cowboy who saw her potential and waited for her to reach it. Together forever, as they always meant to be, watching over the home they built and the family they loved. Their story became more than just family history. It became a touchstone, a standard against which other relationships were measured. When young people in the family faced difficult decisions about love and commitment, they were reminded of Sarah and Nathan. When patience was required, when doing the right thing meant sacrifice, when love needed to grow slowly and carefully, the story was told again. That's what real love looks like, the elders would say, pointing to that photograph. Not just the passion, though they had that. Not just the partnership, though they had that too, but the foundation, the respect, the willingness to wait for what was right, to build something that would last. The land itself seemed to remember them. The creek where they had shared so many important conversations still runs clear. The hill where they rest overlooks the ranch that continues to thrive, adapting to new times while honoring old values. The house stands as a monument to the life they built together, simple but sturdy, made with care, meant to last. And perhaps that is the truest measure of their love, not in the grand gestures or the dramatic moments, but in the everyday choices they made to honor each other, to work together, to build something bigger than themselves. In the patience Nathan showed, giving Sarah time to grow into herself before asking her to be his wife. In the determination Sarah demonstrated, proving herself worthy of his faith. In the partnership they created, neither one diminished but both enhanced by their union. 3 years of waiting had given them 50 years of love. 50 years that built a legacy reaching far beyond their own lives, in their great-great-grandchildren who still work the land, in the values passed down through generations. In the story itself, told and retold, a reminder that the best things are worth waiting for, that doing right is always right, and that love built on a foundation of respect and patience can endure anything. The sun sets over the Zimmerman Ranch the same way it did in 1878, painting the sky in glory. The wind still moves through the tall grass like waves on an ocean. The land endures as it always has, as they knew it always would. And somewhere, in the space between memory and presence, Sarah and Nathan remain forever young in the moment they finally came together, forever old in the wisdom they earned through their years, forever present in the legacy they left behind. It was a love story that began with a mistake and became something beautiful. A story that started with disappointment and grew into joy. A story of a mail-order bride who arrived too young, a cowboy who waited 3 years, and a love that truly did last forever, not just through their lifetimes, but beyond, echoing through generations. A testament to what two people can build when they choose patience over convenience, respect over possession, and lasting love over immediate gratification. And so their story ends where all the best love stories do, not with an ending at all, but with a continuing, a living on, a love that transcends time and becomes something eternal. Sarah and Nathan Zimmerman, who waited when waiting was hard, who loved when love was tested, and who built together something that would last long after they were gone. This is their story, the story of the ranch, the story of the family, the story of a love that began in 1878 and continues still. Wherever their descendants gather, wherever the story is told, wherever two people choose to do the hard right thing instead of the easy wrong one. This is the story of Sarah and Nathan, and it is, truly, a love story for the ages.